This morning on BRN, redefining service reliability and employee engagement in contact centers. Joining me now to discuss this, Adrienne Ryan Pinto is a managing director with Enterprise Iron. Adrienne, always great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the program this morning.
Nice to see you as well.
It's always a pleasure talking with you. So much knowledge, and I'm really excited to talk about the contact center. I guess my first question for you is, does the contact center still represent an important point of contact for consumers, for customers?
Oh, absolutely. Even with all of the advancements with the self-service on websites and automated tools, you still need a contact center for folks to be able to talk to a live person. That is still, again, a very important component of the customer experience. And certainly there are different reasons why people want to talk to an actual agent. Some of that is the complex questions that come up that you cannot do through self-service. Some of it is because that's just the channel of choice for certain demographics, that they just feel more comfortable talking to someone, and that's really important to make sure you still provide that. Lots of times too, that if something didn't go right, and let's be honest, the whole idea of a contact center is because something didn't go the way it was meant to go, that people don't call the contact center to say, hey, everything's great with my account. And so if you have like an escalation and there's something that was a little bit more complicated, like you need to do that with a live person. And there's no denying, if you do it well and you do it and the customer is very satisfied at the end, that creates a great amount of trust and loyalty with our customers. And so that's it's still a really important part of delivering service. The other thing too that I'll point out as well is that like all of the stuff that's been built on web, it's not always bilingual. So that's the other thing. When you have a bilingual customer, lots of times the only way they're going to get service is by talking to a person, because we don't have everything built out in a bilingual environment on a website.
Sure. And I was going to say, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I took phone calls in Y2K, and I no one ever called and said, hey, Jeff, you're doing a great job. They always called because distribution wasn't processed on time or their perception was. So, but I think you're right. I think you can connect the dots and actually improve those customer satisfaction scores, which now make a big difference in a lot of different things. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Let's talk about how these contact centers are staffed and organized, because that has evolved over time. I mean, it used to be based off of the type of transaction, the type of product. How are they organized and staffed today, Adrienne?
Well, you know what? They haven't changed as much as you'd think, Jeff, that for the most part, depending on how big a contact center that you're talking about, you're always going to have your agents and the agents that are going to be actually talking to your customers. In certain circumstances, they're going to be skilled differently. So you might have different tiers within that. But I like to call them that's the front line, the people that are actually talking to your customers. So that's the key. Obviously, that's part of the contact center. And then you've got your supervisors and team leaders that are there, which has traditionally been always the component that makes sure that the people on the front lines have the support that they need if something does need to be escalated. So that's important. And I'm a big believer that you shouldn't have more than 10 or so folks reporting into a supervisor to make them effective. But what's changed a little bit is this quality assurance. And you always would sit with a rep and make sure that they were doing their job correctly. But with the actual functionality now, there's a lot of monitoring that's going on and feedback and KPIs regarding quality. So lots of contact centers now have a standalone quality assurance group. In fact, sometimes they actually outsource that. It could be a third party that's coming in and monitoring the calls to make sure that the reps are answering them effectively. Another thing that's a little different now than it might have been when you and I were on the phones, lots of times you have an actual dedicated training department because things are changing so quickly. So you need a trainer that is not part of the contact center that could come in and train the staff, not only on onboarding and like the new staff that comes in, they're actually constantly going in and doing refresher training or anything that might have changed, because it's such a dynamic environment now that things are always changing for the agents, and they need to make sure that they're up to date in what they're saying to the customers. Another big change, although this again was there from the get-go, but it's gotten much more sophisticated, is workforce management. Like that's a big part of a contact center now, is being able to really analyze how are the calls coming in? What are our peak periods during the day? How do we staff during that time? And a really efficient contact center will have folks that can come in and out of the contact center depending on what's happening. So they might work a couple of hours in the morning and then get a break. And then if it gets busier later in the day, if you could be creative about staffing it that way, that's a really efficient way to make sure that you're meeting your service levels and you're keeping your group engaged.
Yeah, and Adrienne, what in your estimation, what are the top concerns? Because it used to be staffing. It's a hard job. I think it's one of the hardest jobs in customer service. I mean, it just is hard. It's a lot of pressure. There's, as you said, there's a lot of change. It's evolving. You got to be adaptable, flexible. So for contact centers, what are the largest concerns that they have?
And again, it's not that different than it was years ago. I mean, staffing, I would still say, is the number one concern for someone running a contact center. You're really trying to find the right quality employees. And as we've talked about at the beginning of this, it's a tough job. And so you need a certain type of person that's resilient, that can kind of work through that. And so you need to make sure that you're onboarding the right employees and then keeping those employees. Because if you did not do that and bring in the right folks in a very short period of time, they're going to say, okay, this job is not for me. And that is incredibly costly to bring them in, train them, and then find after a month or so that they're on their way, that they can't keep up with what's going on. And so there's no denying that. And the other part of the staffing that makes this tough for a contact center is everything you do as a contact center agent is watched. From the minute you log in the morning, you could see how long your calls are taking, when you step away to go to the restroom, when you're taking a break for lunch. Everything is documented. And then there's lots of positives to that, because if you're a good employee, you can really show that I am banging it out and I'm doing a great job. But for some people, that's not a fun environment to work in. So you do need to make sure that you're finding the right folks. So staffing is still way up there, Jeff, as something that you're always trying to make sure you're finding the right people for your contact center. Cost clearly is a big driver. That's always been the case, that everyone is looking for how can we do this, because it is a cost center for any organization and it's a necessary thing you have to provide for customers. But how do you do it as cost effectively as you can while still providing the service that your customers expect? And certainly there was a big time there where lots of contact center work was being shipped offshore, and that worked for certain levels of questions. But we're finding a lot of our clients have bought some of that stuff back in-house because that did not work. But then having it all in-house can be costly. So we also have clients and partners for like nearshore, where you have folks that they're a little less expensive than having them in the States, but the actual cultural and the ability to make sure you get the right people on the phones is a little bit easier to do. So the cost is always something that you have to pay attention to. Worrying about business continuity with all the things. I mean, we're both North Carolina, like what's happened there. There's natural disasters. You need to make sure that you can answer phones and there's no downtime, regardless of what's going on. And so the cloud technology has helped that tremendously. But that's something, again, as a contact manager, you've got to make sure, contact center manager, you got to make sure that you've got a good business continuity and disaster recovery program. The other thing, though, that's a little different that wasn't as prevalent when we were on the phones, obviously, is fraud. That really the contact center now has become the first line of defense against fraud. So that is a big, big piece of training and making sure that you've got reps that are paying attention to the red flags that might be going off when you've got somebody calling in that they may be an imposter and trying to get in there and take money out of an account. I mean, we've all seen that in the news, that it's horrible, some of the scams that happen, particularly, again, with these financial services companies that we do business with. So being a defense against fraud, making sure the reps are properly trained and know what to look for and then report it so that money is not leaving an account that shouldn't, is also a new and an important component of making sure you're running an effective contact center.
Yeah, certainly a lot more pressure than we face,
Yes.
a lot more important being the guardian, if you will, and the connectivity to the customer. Adrienne, we're going to leave it there. This is the end of part one of our interview. Tomorrow, you're going to come back. We're going to talk about some innovative strategies that are being deployed to help contact centers thrive. Adrienne, I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we look forward to talking to you again tomorrow.
That sounds great. Thanks, Jeff.
And don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse, for all the news in one place. Details at our website. And we're back again tomorrow, as I said, for part two of our discussion with Adrienne on contact centers. You're not going to want to miss it. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.